She went seeking peace at a paradise resort, escaping from a turbulent divorce. Suddenly, a kind man offered help with her luggage and her life was never the same. A sweeping romance was born under the scorching sun and sea breeze. Months later, she discovers she's carrying not just one, but 3 babies, and he is the heir to the resort. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Nicole's heart still felt heavy from the divorce as she stepped off the shuttle, pulled her suitcase across the polished marble floor, and paused in the vast lobby of the 5-star resort. Soft music played overhead, mingling with the gentle breeze that drifted in through open glass doors. Towering palms in large decorative pots framed the reception desk, while a cluster of lavish couches invited tired travelers to sink in and admire the tropical surroundings. She exhaled, feeling a wave of both excitement and apprehension. She had promised herself this trip would be a new beginning, a place to find peace after so many turbulent months. Yet, seeing couples in bright vacation wear laughing and leaning into each other made her second-guess coming alone. She eased her luggage beside a gleaming pillar and took a moment to observe other arrivals. A newlywed pair in matching white outfits whispered conspiratorially, while a boisterous family of 5 struggled to keep their enthusiastic children from crashing into unsuspecting guests. Nicole felt an ache in her chest. She had once imagined arriving to a place like this with her own family. Now she was here on her own, determined to do something different with her life, hoping to rediscover happiness in an environment made for relaxation and romance. When she finally approached the reception desk, an employee with a name tag that read Jasmine welcomed her with a polite smile. Nicole introduced herself and offered a small, relieved grin, thinking how good it felt to be acknowledged by name. She confirmed her reservation details and waited, noticing a glitch in the system by the way Jasmine frowned at the computer screen. Jasmine murmured, tapping keys faster. "I'm not seeing your suite in the system." Nicole's stomach fluttered with unease. "Is there an issue? I confirmed this reservation weeks ago." Jasmine gave her a sympathetic look, continuing to click through various tabs. "It seems there's a mistake. The suite you booked has been given to another guest by error, and we're fully booked right now." Nicole's pulse spiked. After all she'd been through, this felt like a cruel joke. She gently pressed the counter with her fingertips, trying to stay composed. "I don't understand. I paid in advance. There must be something you can do." Jasmine winced, looking genuinely remorseful. "Let me try to speak with my manager. Please wait a moment." Leaning against the counter, Nicole willed herself not to burst into frustrated tears. She was at a place designed for tranquil getaways, but already stress clung to her like a tight scarf around her neck. She glanced around again at couples laughing, families chattering, and singles who looked confident and carefree, as if any problem would instantly vanish in this tropical paradise. She felt a pang of envy at their ease. The manager arrived a few minutes later, only to confirm there were no immediate alternatives available. "I apologize," he said, straightening his crisp uniform jacket. "We're overbooked due to a scheduling conflict. We can move you to another room tomorrow, but for tonight—" Before the manager could finish, a rich, calm voice interjected from behind. "Is there any way to free up a suite, Andrew? Perhaps a cancelled reservation or one that's not being used yet?" Nicole turned to see a tall man with slightly disheveled sandy blonde hair and a warm but concerned expression. He had an easy confidence about him, dressed casually in linen pants and a short-sleeved button-up. His gaze flicked kindly to Nicole before returning to the manager. She felt an odd tingle of gratitude, but also caution. Who was this stranger, stepping into her problem as though he had some authority? The manager's face shifted into a deferential expression. "Thomas, I'll check again. Let me see what can be rearranged." The man named Thomas turned back toward Nicole. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm sorry you're going through this. You shouldn't have to accept a mistake that wasn't your fault." Nicole blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. It had been so long since anyone other than a paid lawyer had stepped in to defend her. "Thank you," she managed softly, feeling a cautious warmth spread in her chest. While Andrew disappeared to sort out the problem, Thomas offered a reassuring smile. "This place is usually wonderful, I promise. Let's hope they resolve things quickly." Nicole felt the tension in her shoulders recede a fraction. Even if she didn't want to trust easily, her past year had taught her to be wary. His presence felt strangely grounding. "I appreciate it. Really." 10 minutes later, Andrew returned with a solution. A smaller suite on a lower floor. It wasn't Nicole's original booking, but it had an ocean view and immediate availability. She wanted to press for the suite she had booked, but exhaustion from the long trip and her own emotional fatigue overruled her. Accepting with a polite nod, she thanked Thomas once more. The way he inclined his head, eyes bright with understanding, stirred something unexpected in her. A staff member then escorted Nicole to the temporary room. As they weaved through winding halls, glimpses of the sparkling pool and the turquoise sea beyond the expansive windows stole her breath. Flower arrangements lined the corridors, their sweet fragrance a reminder of how luxurious and meticulously curated this resort truly was. Inside her room, the windows overlooked the beach, where rows of lounge chairs and umbrellas dotted the sand. The suite itself was cozy, with cream-colored walls, rattan furniture, and tropical-inspired paintings. Despite not being what she'd originally requested, it felt welcoming enough. She set her luggage near the small closet and took a moment to breathe in the ocean-scented air drifting through the open glass door. A faint knock at the door startled her. She opened it to see a smiling young staff member with a tray of refreshments. "Compliments of the house," he said. "I'm Ben, if you need anything." "Thank you." She accepted the cool, fruit-infused water, sipping it gratefully. Ben lingered a moment, looking as though he might say more, then gave a quick bow and turned to go. Before leaving, he sent her a knowing grin. "Don't worry about earlier. Everything seems to work out around here, especially with Thomas's help." Nicole almost asked what he meant, but decided it was better not to pry. She closed the door and let out a slow exhale, reminding herself she wasn't here to get entangled in new mysteries. She only wanted some relaxation, a chance to forget painful memories. Yet Thomas's kind face hovered at the edges of her thoughts. Determined not to spend her first day sulking in the room, she changed into a light sundress and slipped on sandals. A walk around the pool area might help her adjust to this new environment, she reasoned. Downstairs, the sun cast an inviting glow over the shimmering water. Tourists lounged on cushioned chairs, sipping bright cocktails, and an energetic group played water volleyball on the far side of the pool, cheering at each serve. Wandering past the pool bar, she overheard a cheerful conversation between a group of young women discussing the variety of resort activities. One noticed Nicole and waved her over. "You here alone too?" the woman asked, introducing herself as Selena. "I came with friends, but they're napping. Join us." Nicole hesitated, her old self wanting to retreat, but she pushed past that. "Sure," she said. "I'm Nicole." They chatted about the snorkel tours, paddleboarding lessons, and upcoming events. Selena recommended Nicole try the guided boat trip scheduled for the next day. "It's a great way to see the reefs. You'll love it," Selena enthused. A spark of excitement lit inside Nicole. Maybe this was the carefree spirit she'd needed, a chance to rediscover little joys, even if she was still battling heartbreak. After parting ways with Selena, Nicole strolled along a palm-lined path leading toward the shore. The gentle crash of waves soothed her. She paused at the water's edge, letting the tide swirl around her ankles, warm and reassuring. Couples ambled by, hand in hand, reminding Nicole that she was unattached and, in a way, free. She had endured a rocky marriage and a draining divorce, but maybe she had arrived at a place where she could learn to trust herself, and perhaps others, again. By late afternoon, she returned to the resort, fatigue tugging at her. She decided a short nap might revive her for the evening. Stifling a yawn, she made her way inside, turning down a corridor that led to her suite. Suddenly, a tall man rushed around the corner, nearly colliding with her. He barked an insult under his breath when Nicole apologized. Alarm flickered through her at the scowl on his face. Before she could step aside, she heard a calm, steady voice. "Easy there," Thomas said, appearing at her side with an air of quiet confidence. "No need to be rude." The tall man grumbled something unintelligible, shot Nicole a final glare, then stomped away. Nicole's pulse thudded in her ears. She wasn't used to strangers coming to her defense once, let alone twice in a single day. "Thank you," she managed, brushing her hair out of her eyes, hoping she didn't look as rattled as she felt. "I'm sorry you had to see that." Thomas shook his head, a reassuring smile on his face. "Don't worry. Some people forget their manners, even in paradise." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then offered, "I hope the temporary room worked out for you?" "It's fine," Nicole replied. "Better than sleeping in the lobby." He chuckled. "Well, if there's anything else you need, let me know." Moments later, she reached her suite, breath still slightly uneven. Thomas hovered in her mind as she stepped inside and closed the door. What was it about him? His kindness felt genuine, yet she couldn't ignore the hints of something more beneath the polite exterior. She set her beach tote on a chair, feeling drained but strangely comforted by the day's events. Maybe this trip wouldn't just be about self-healing. Maybe it was leading her toward people she was meant to meet. She turned to lock her door, reflecting on how close she had come to facing real trouble in such a short time. The swirl of thoughts was so absorbing that she nearly missed the soft tap against the wood. Heart-skipping, she opened the door a crack. Thomas was there, eyes filled with concern. "I just wanted to make sure you're truly all right. It's been a chaotic first day for you." His tone was warm, unforced. Nicole's cheeks heated under that sincere gaze. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her pulse begged to differ. She wondered if it was truly wise to let her guard down again, but that part of her longing for connection, for a fresh start, seemed to whisper that maybe this was the exact reason she had come here. As Nicole closes the door to her room, she hears Thomas's calm voice from behind, asking if she's okay. A simple gesture that sends her heart racing and leaves her wondering if this resort stay is about to turn into something far more complicated than she ever anticipated. Nicole settled into her suite after the tense moment in the corridor. She locked the door, her heart still racing from the way Thomas had calmly intervened. Despite the unease of the day's events, part of her felt oddly safe. She took a few deep breaths, brushed her hair, and decided it was best to call it a night. Tomorrow, she thought, she would start fresh. She woke early the next morning, the ocean breeze carrying sunlight through the thin curtains. Eager to shake off the lingering awkwardness, she slipped into a light outfit and headed downstairs in search of breakfast. The lobby buzzed with activity as new arrivals streamed in, staff darted about, and the gentle hum of chatter mixed with the distant rumble of crashing waves. At the resort's open-air buffet, tables draped in white linen displayed an inviting spread of fresh fruits, colorful pastries, and steaming platters of eggs. As Nicole filled a plate with pineapple slices and a croissant, she scanned the room for a quiet spot to sit. Before she could choose a table, she recognized Thomas at a nearby corner, sipping a cup of coffee. He caught her eye with a small wave, beckoning her over. "Sleep well?" he asked when she approached. His voice was even, though Nicole thought she caught the slightest hesitation, as if he too remembered how close they had stood the night before. "I did, actually," she replied, setting down her plate. "I'm glad everything finally calmed down." Thomas smiled, and a faint warmth lit his gaze. "I'm relieved the mix-up with your room was sorted." He took a careful sip from his coffee mug. "I hope you can finally enjoy this place." Nicole felt her shoulders relax. Maybe this truly was her chance to start anew. "Thanks," she said softly. "I'm planning on making the most of it." While they chatted, Resort staff would occasionally come by to refill coffee or collect empty dishes. Nicole noticed each person had a polite but deferential air toward Thomas, more so than she'd observed with other guests. It struck her as odd. At one point, a young employee nearly tripped trying to hurry away after Thomas thanked him. Nicole raised a brow at this behavior, but Thomas smoothly changed the topic before she could comment on it. After breakfast, Nicole decided on a poolside lounge chair to soak up some sun. The late morning heat felt soothing, exactly what she'd hoped for on this trip. She stretched out on a cushioned seat, letting the hum of distant laughter and the rhythmic splash of swimmers lull her into a gentle doze. Now and then, she'd crack an eye open to watch as couples dipped in and out of the pool. A group of younger travelers joked among themselves, occasionally tossing a beach ball across the water. Her tranquility was broken by the sound of a bartender calling out friendly hellos to passers-by. Eager for something cool, Nicole got up and made her way to the pool bar. It was a small cabana draped with tropical flowers, staffed by a cheerful man blending fruit smoothies. Leaning on the bamboo counter, she ordered a pineapple mango drink, scanning the pool area as she waited. "You're new here," the bartender remarked. He was tall, with sun-bleached hair and a mischievous smile. "How are you liking the resort so far?" Nicole offered a faint smile. "It's beautiful. Just had some interesting moments on my first day, but I'm managing." He chuckled, pushing a tall glass toward her. "If Thomas is looking out for you, you'll be just fine." She paused mid-sip. "Thomas?" The bartender shrugged as if he'd said too much. "He's a good guy. Helped me out before," was all he offered, quickly switching to greet another customer. Nicole's curiosity deepened. She took her smoothie, wondering again about Thomas's role here. It was midday when she found an empty lounge chair to settle back on. The sun was high, the resort vibrantly alive with music, chatter, and the distant clang of lunch being prepared. Just when she started to drift in a lazy half-doze, a sharp voice cut through the buzz. "I'm sorry, but this seat is taken," snapped a man in a loud Hawaiian shirt. Nicole's eyes flew open. He was glaring at her, arms folded, sandals slapping against the wet concrete. "You're in my chair." She glanced around, noticing several other empty seats, but he seemed determined to reclaim the exact spot she occupied. Nicole's frustration flared. It felt petty, but she also didn't want another confrontation. "I can move," she replied calmly, gathering her things. "No problem." "Why should you move?" a voice said beside her. She turned to see Thomas approaching, his brow creased. "There's plenty of seating." The man looked Thomas up and down, scoffed and huffed. "I like this spot. She can find another." Nicole's pulse quickened. She didn't want a scene. "It's fine," she insisted, starting to stand. But Thomas gently placed a hand on her shoulder, a subtle gesture that said, "Stay put." "She was here first," he said evenly, his voice cool with quiet authority. "I'm sure you can find another chair just as comfortable." Something in Thomas's stance made the man think twice. Muttering to himself about pushy people, he stomped off toward a different lounge chair, leaving Nicole to catch her breath. An uneasy hush lingered among the surrounding guests who had witnessed the exchange. "Thank you," Nicole said after a moment, still shaken by the man's aggression. "I'm not sure it was worth the argument." Thomas shrugged, offering a steady, reassuring smile. "He was in the wrong. You shouldn't have to inconvenience yourself because someone else is being rude." Nicole's heart fluttered, unaccustomed to someone stepping in for her, especially so soon after last night's hallway encounter. As the tension lifted, she realized she felt safer with Thomas close, a realization that both comforted and unnerved her. Old memories of her marriage and the fear of letting someone get too close tugged at her mind, but she shoved them aside. They ended up talking for a while, first about the rude guest, then about more casual topics: travel, favorite foods, the best ways to enjoy a beach vacation. Their banter lightened Nicole's mood, filling the afternoon with genuine laughter. She learned Thomas had visited the resort many times in the past, but he glossed over the details. Whenever she gently probed for more, like what drew him here so often, he'd dodge with a joke or steer the conversation toward her experiences instead. Eventually, a staff member approached Thomas, excused himself, and spoke in hushed tones. Thomas's expression tightened, and he apologized to Nicole, saying he had to take care of something. As he left, she watched him head toward the main lobby with purposeful strides. People along the way nodded respectfully, stepping aside for him. Something about the subtle way they treated him confirmed Nicole's growing suspicion. Thomas was more than just a friendly guest. The rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant haze of sunbathing and reading. Nicole felt calmer, even if a part of her mind lingered on Thomas's odd familiarity with the staff. At dinner, she opted for a small table by the windows, watching the sunset paint the horizon pink and gold. She noticed Thomas arrive with a group of resort employees, all dressed in business casual attire, but he seemed engrossed in their conversation. Rather than interrupt, Nicole returned to her plate, deciding it best to give him space. Night fell, enveloping the resort in soft, glowing lanterns. The faint sound of a live musician reached Nicole's ears as she strolled along a path lined with fragrant hibiscus. Breezes rustled the palm fronds overhead, creating patterns of dancing shadows on the walkway. She was making her way back to her suite when she caught sight of movement near one of the smaller side entrances to the lobby. Curious, she stepped quietly behind a tall palm tree and peered around it. Thomas stood with a hotel manager under the dim overhead light. He held a document in his hand, scanning it with a look of concentration. The manager waited, looking concerned. Nicole's chest tightened. She thought maybe Thomas had come to the resort purely to relax, but this was no typical guest behavior. Thomas seemed to reach a decision. He handed the paper back to the manager, saying something Nicole couldn't decipher from this distance, but his tone carried a note of authority. Even in the low light, his eyes shone with intensity. There was no question in her mind now. He must have a deeper connection to this place than he had let on. From behind a palm tree's shadow, Nicole catches a clear look at Thomas's determined expression as he hands a document back to the manager. She's struck with the realization that he isn't just any guest. There's more to his story than she imagined. The memory of Thomas handing that document to the manager lingered in Nicole's dreams, merging with the sound of gentle ocean waves. When the bright morning light finally roused her, she blinked away the last traces of sleep and recalled in vivid detail how Thomas's face had looked so serious, so determined. He wasn't just another vacationer, that was obvious now. But if he had an important role at the resort, why hide it? She decided not to jump to conclusions. Instead, she would keep her eyes open and try to understand the situation naturally. Eager for some fresh air and a clearer head, she changed into a loose sundress and sandals, then headed downstairs for breakfast. The open-air restaurant overlooked the beach, its floor-to-ceiling windows inviting in sunshine and a salty breeze. She chose a table on the deck, where the surf rolled onto the sand just a few steps away. As she filled her plate with fruit and toast, one of the staff approached with a friendly smile. She seized the chance to casually ask, "I was wondering about Thomas. He's staying here, right? Do you happen to know if he works at the resort too?" The staff member's expression faltered for half a second. "Thomas is, well, he's around a lot," came the halting reply, as though they'd been trained to give a careful answer. "Is everything okay?" "Oh yes, absolutely," Nicole said lightly, forced grin on her face. "I just notice how involved he seems in everything. Thought I'd ask." The staff member gave a polite nod and hurried off to refill pitchers of juice. Clearly, they weren't going to offer any direct explanations. Nicole sighed, taking a bite of her breakfast and trying not to dwell on the sudden hush that had fallen between them. So far, all she had were hints. Her thoughts were interrupted by a cheerful voice calling her name. She turned to see a woman around her own age waving from across the deck. It was Selena, the friendly solo traveler she'd met on her first day. "Mind if I join?" Selena asked, carrying a small plate of waffles. Not at all. Nicole gestured to the open chair. They chatted about their mornings. Selena had booked a guided swim with sea turtles, while Nicole was still considering her options. Halfway through the conversation, Selena brightened with enthusiasm. "You know about the local dance event tonight, right? It's at the open-air stage near the gardens. Live music, traditional performances. It's one of the highlights of the resort experience." Nicole admitted she hadn't heard about it, and Selena was quick to extend an invitation. "You have to come. It's colorful, fun, and everyone can join in at the end. Some of the staff will teach you the dance moves. I always say, if there's a local event, you gotta experience it. Otherwise, you just end up lying on a beach, missing out on the culture." It sounded like exactly the sort of thing Nicole needed, something to immerse herself in that didn't involve anxiously dwelling on her past or worrying about Thomas's secrets. She agreed, and Selena left soon after, excitedly promising to save Nicole a spot with the best view of the stage. With a free morning ahead, Nicole decided to try the resort's beachfront yoga class. She hoped that gentle stretches and deep breathing might help calm the swirl of questions in her mind. About a dozen people gathered on soft mats under a thatched roof pavilion overlooking the waves. As the instructor led them through sun salutations, Nicole tried to focus solely on her breath and the warm sand beneath her feet. Yet the image of Thomas standing with the resort manager kept creeping back, distracting her. When class ended, she rolled up her mat, determined to push her worries aside and enjoy the day. That resolve lasted all of 5 minutes, until she turned toward the main path and nearly walked straight into Thomas himself. He stood there, broad-shouldered in a casual shirt, with a slight grin curling his lips. "Nicole," he said, looking surprised yet pleased. "I was going to see if you wanted to get lunch later. I didn't mean to interrupt your yoga session." She felt her stomach flutter, unprepared for his sudden presence. "I'm finished, so you're not interrupting at all," she managed. "Lunch sounds great." They agreed to meet at a poolside cafe in an hour, giving Nicole time to change. She showered off the light sheen of sweat and sea salt, then slipped into a breezy skirt and blouse. When she arrived, Thomas was already seated at a shaded table scanning the menu with mild interest. He looked up, a quick flash of relief lighting his expression. They ordered simple dishes, grilled fish tacos for Nicole, a club sandwich for Thomas. Conversation at first flowed easily, with talk of their favorite places to travel and random funny stories they each had from previous vacations. But as their plates emptied, Nicole sensed a quiet tension in the space between them. She summoned her courage and teased gently, "You're very busy for someone who claims to be relaxing. Any chance you're juggling secret responsibilities here?" Thomas chuckled, though it sounded slightly forced. Maybe. My family has strong ties to this place. I get pulled into certain obligations sometimes." His hand rested on the table, drumming a small rhythm. "I don't want to bore you with the details." Nicole's brows lifted. "I'm not bored. I just notice how staff keep deferring to you." She paused, not sure if she was overstepping. "It's a little strange for a regular guest, that's all." Thomas took a breath, then shrugged with a faint smile. "Family responsibilities. Let's just say that. Maybe once things settle, I'll explain." She wanted to press him further, but his eyes flickered with a mix of relief and apprehension. She decided not to push. If he wanted to share, he would. For now, she was content that he was at least acknowledging the mystery, even if only in vague terms. As they paid the bill, a cheerful tune sounded over the resort's loudspeakers, followed by an excited announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, this weekend the grand gala celebrating our resort's anniversary, our biggest event of the season." Several guests within earshot clapped, exchanging excited smiles. Nicole noticed Thomas shift in his seat. She turned to him, amused. "Is that another family responsibility?" He tensed. "Something like that. It's complicated." That single sentence made her pulse quicken with curiosity. Rather than look happy about the upcoming gala, Thomas seemed guarded, which only fueled the questions churning in Nicole's mind. Was he somehow in charge of the event? She guessed she'd find out soon enough. They parted ways, Thomas claiming he had errands to run. Nicole wandered back to her suite. On the coffee table sat a creamy white envelope decorated with a gold-embossed seal. Inside, she found a formal invitation to the anniversary gala. Her name was elegantly printed, and a handwritten note from Thomas simply read, "Hope you'll join me. T." She was smiling at the invite when she noticed another piece of paper hidden beneath it. Unlike the ornate envelope, this scrap was a plain folded sheet with uneven edges. She opened it, only to find a single typed line in capital letters. "Be careful, not everything is what it seems." Her heartbeat kicked up a notch. Was this a prank? Or had someone seen her interest in Thomas and decided to issue a warning? She recalled how certain staff had acted, the hush in their voices whenever Thomas's name came up. It was possible the note referred to him. But what if there was something else entirely happening behind the scenes? Trying to stay calm, she tucked the note into the desk drawer. She resolved not to jump to wild conclusions. Still, it was jarring to have such a blatant caution appear just as she'd started feeling closer to Thomas. Evening arrived more quickly than expected. The sun was just dipping below the horizon when Nicole headed to the open-air stage where the local dance event would take place. Paper lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm, festive glow. Selena waved her over to a row of seats with a perfect view. Musicians in bright costumes warmed up, sending lively rhythms through the night air. For the first hour, Nicole let herself enjoy the swirl of color, the pulsing drums, the dancers in traditional attire. It was exhilarating, a celebration of local culture that she'd almost forgotten she came here to experience. Yet, every now and then, her mind drifted back to those two notes. Thomas's gentle invitation to the gala and the cryptic warning to be careful. When the show ended, some audience members got on stage to learn a few dance moves. Nicole joined Selena, laughing as they tried and failed to match the elegant footwork of the performers. Afterward, they sat on the edge of the stage, glowing from exertion and happiness. But in the back of her mind, doubts were creeping in. Was she ignoring a real threat by dismissing that anonymous message? Later that night, returning to her suite, she lit the small bedside lamp. Her eyes landed on the folded paper in the drawer, the typed words stark in her imagination. Tentatively, she picked it up again, rereading the warning. She couldn't decide whether to take it seriously or laugh at the dramatic tone. Then her gaze moved to the invitation from Thomas, the graceful loops of his handwriting across the ivory card. It represented warmth, kindness, possibly even genuine affection, or it could be a door into more secrets. Nicole's hand trembled as she set both papers side by side. If Thomas was so wonderful, why was he hiding his true connections to the resort? And who would bother leaving a warning in her room? She felt a pang of unease that undercut the day's joyful moments. Nicole stares at the anonymous note, heart racing. In her mind, she hears Thomas's voice inviting her to the gala, but the cryptic message suggests unseen dangers lurking around. Nicole sat on the edge of her bed, the anonymous note still clutched between her fingers. The sounds of the resort drifted in through her open window, laughter from the pool, distant music echoing near the beach. She folded the note again, tracing the words with her eyes one last time before slipping it into a side pocket of her purse. If something strange was happening, she needed to be ready, not just for the gala but for whatever this secret pointed toward. Determined to clear her head, she changed into a breezy outfit and stepped outside. Early sunlight bathed the resort in warmth and muted gold, casting long, soft shadows across the palm-lined pathways. She wandered past the gardens where guests were sipping morning coffees beneath colorful umbrellas before making her way down a winding staircase that led directly to the beach. The shore was quieter than usual. A few joggers trotted along the water's edge, and a family further down the sand coaxed a small child to wade in the gentle waves. The surf curled around Nicole's ankles as she strolled, the wet sand cooling her feet. The rhythmic hush of the ocean eased some of her tension. Holding the anonymous note had left her with a heaviness in her chest, a nagging feeling that she wasn't just being paranoid. Halfway through her walk, she turned to see Thomas approaching. His hair was ruffled by the breeze, and he held his shoes in one hand, allowing the sand to shift beneath his bare feet. She watched as he neared, noticing a flicker of concern in his eyes that he tried to mask with a casual smile. "Morning," he said. "Mind if I join you?" She gave a small nod, realizing she hadn't quite decided how she felt about him yet. "Sure, I was just taking in the view." They walked side by side, waves rolling in gently. For a short while, the conversation hovered around safe topics, travel stories and the surprising variety of tropical flowers in the gardens. Still, Nicole sensed something unsaid hanging in the air, as though Thomas wanted to share a deeper truth but didn't dare. Eventually, she found the courage to nudge him a bit. "You seem preoccupied," she said, glancing at his furrowed brow. "Everything okay?" Thomas exhaled, pausing in the sand. "I'm dealing with some family matters," he admitted. "It's nothing you need to worry about. Just obligations." He offered a reassuring smile, but Nicole noted how his shoulders tensed. She considered pressing him for details but hesitated, recalling how he'd deflected her questions before. Instead, she gave a gentle nod and let him change the subject. Deep down, though, her resolve to find answers only grew stronger. Whatever these family matters were, they clearly had the power to stir him. Their stroll was cut short by the buzz of Thomas's phone. He stepped away, answering in hushed, urgent tones, his gaze darting toward the resort. Nicole pretended to watch the waves while straining to catch fragments of his tense replies, words like deadlines, delays, and arrival. When he ended the call, his expression was clouded with worry. "Something important?" she asked softly, not wanting to pry too openly. He gave her a distant look, then forced a tight smile. "Yeah, I need to handle a few things. I'll see you later, all right?" Before she could respond, he was already jogging back up the beach toward the resort. A flicker of irritation sparked in her chest. She understood he might have personal obligations, but the way he evaded her questions only heightened her suspicions. Deciding she needed her own answers, Nicole wandered a bit more, eventually returning to the lobby to grab a bottled water and maybe some fresh fruit. The tall glass doors opened into a lively scene, guests checking in, staff escorting new arrivals. As she moved toward a seating area, she overheard two employees whispering in the corner, their voices lowered. "The heir's arrival is supposed to be soon," one said. "We need everything perfect." Nicole felt her pulse tick up. The word heir instantly rattled inside her mind. Glancing at them out of the corner of her eye, she watched as they noticed her presence and abruptly dispersed, leaving her more uneasy than ever. If there was an heir to the resort chain arriving, could that have anything to do with Thomas's secrets? She decided she'd ask him directly, no more subtle hints. Later that afternoon, she spotted him near the pool talking to someone in a business suit. Nicole summoned her resolve and approached. The suited man left quickly, nodding respectfully at Thomas before walking away. "Hey," she began, trying to keep her voice calm. "Are you still caught up in family obligations?" Thomas gave a small shrug. "I am. I'm sorry about earlier. I just can't talk about it right now. Bad timing." Frustration clashed with the genuine concern she felt for him. "You keep saying that. When will it be good timing?" He looked pained. "Soon. Let me handle this first. Please trust me." Nicole wanted to protest, but she couldn't ignore the exhaustion in his eyes, as though he was juggling 100 responsibilities. She let it go with a quiet nod. For now. The rest of the afternoon felt charged with tension. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, hinting at an oncoming storm. She meandered through the resort hallways, the air thick and muggy, staff hurrying about. Suddenly, a loud voice erupted in the lobby. "I've been wronged!" a guest shouted, slamming his hand on the reception counter. He appeared furious, complaining about sabotage, something missing from his room, or a trip that had been cancelled without his knowledge. Other guests paused, alarmed. The front desk manager tried to calm him, but the man grew louder, threatening to file a lawsuit against the resort. Before Nicole could step in or back away, Thomas emerged from a side door near the front desk. She saw the immediate shift in the employee's posture, as though they awaited his direction. He approached the furious guest, his composure steady. "Sir," Thomas began, voice calm yet firm, "I'm sorry you've experienced a problem. Please, let me help sort this out." Without hesitation, he motioned for the manager to pass over the relevant documents and started flipping through them with practiced ease. Nicole stood near a palm tree in the lobby, amazed by how quickly Thomas took charge. His authority was undeniable, and the staff seemed ready to assist him at every turn. Within minutes, he'd located the missing reservation detail, reassured the guest, and arranged a personal escort to resolve any lingering issues. The outraged man, though still grumbling, thanked Thomas with grudging respect and left. Exhaling, Thomas handed the papers back to the manager. Only then did he notice Nicole watching him from a few steps away. He gave her a wry, apologetic grin. "Just lending a hand," he said quietly, as if expecting her to question him. Nicole's thoughts spun. Regular guests didn't step in to handle disputes like that, and no ordinary vacationer would receive such deference from resort employees. She wanted to confront him right there, but something about his tired posture stopped her. He seemed weighed down by unseen burdens. Then, as if on cue, thunder boomed outside. A sudden gust of wind rattled the tall glass doors, sending leaves and stray brochures fluttering across the lobby. Rain began hammering against the windows, the overhead lights flickering in the storm's intensity. The afternoon turned dark, and staff scrambled to close windows, ushering guests to safer spots indoors. Nicole took refuge on a cushioned bench near the entrance, watching the sheets of rain blur the palm trees outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating Thomas as he conferred with the manager again. She caught only snippets of his low voice, talk of needing to finalize paperwork and ensuring the gala wouldn't be disrupted by the weather. Once the worst of the storm passed, Nicole saw him slip a stack of documents into a leather folder. She approached, determined to speak, but he raised a hand gently, his eyes flicking to the manager at his side. "I can't explain right now," he murmured. "Soon, I promise." His words stung, and yet she felt a twinge of sympathy. Clearly something bigger was at play than mere personal errands. She struggled to decide whether to push for answers or respect his plea for patience. Before she could choose, thunder cracked again outside, making her jump. By the time she steadied herself, Thomas was gone, leaving only the echo of his footsteps in the corridor. After the storm, Nicole peeks out into the now quiet lobby and catches Thomas pressing a sealed envelope into a manager's hand, his expression resolute. She realizes this secrecy won't end easily, and she must decide whether to confront it head-on. Nicole found it hard to sleep after spotting Thomas slip that sealed envelope to the manager. She paced the confines of her suite, restless thoughts swirling around his mysterious role. The storm had left the resort drenched, but by dawn, blue skies reasserted themselves. Sunlight poured into her room as if insisting she cast aside her uncertainties and face the day. Deciding she needed a distraction, she headed out to explore the grounds. The humid air carried the scent of damp earth and fresh hibiscus, and occasional puddles glimmered in the morning light. Staff were already busy tidying debris from last night's gusty winds, while a few guests walked barefoot in the wet sand, delighted by the receding tide. She spotted a crew setting up torches and beach chairs in neat semicircles not far from the water's edge. One of them explained there would be a bonfire that evening, a chance for guests to mingle, swap travel stories, and enjoy live music beneath the stars. Nicole thanked them, recalling she had seen a flyer for this event. It seemed like an ideal chance to unwind, maybe even talk to Thomas in a relaxed atmosphere, if he bothered to show up. As the day stretched on, Nicole wandered around the resort, noticing an uptick in activity. Preparations for the looming gala were everywhere. Staff whisked large flower arrangements to and fro, event planners hurried past with clipboards, and overhead announcements reminded guests about the resort's anniversary celebrations. The energy was palpable, but Nicole felt on the outside of it, uncertain whether she belonged. She kept catching glimpses of Thomas, meeting with staff near the infinity pool, disappearing into a private conference room, or speaking into his phone with hushed urgency. Each time she approached, something pulled him away. Each time, her suspicions only grew. By late afternoon, a mild tension tightened her chest. She recalled the typed warning, "Be careful. Not everything is what it seems." She was doing her best to keep that in mind, but it clashed with the moments of genuine warmth and kindness she'd experienced with Thomas. Despite her caution, she found herself craving another conversation with him, anything to feel close to the man behind the mystery. In the early evening, a gentle breeze carried the aroma of barbecue and roasting marshmallows along the beach. Tiki torches flickered, casting a warm glow across the sand, while a local guitarist plucked out catchy melodies. Groups of guests gathered in clusters, some perched on blankets around the bonfire, others dancing barefoot under strings of lanterns. Nicole could already sense the camaraderie drifting through the air, laughter, clinking glasses, and the playful ring of friendly chatter. She claimed a spot on a driftwood log near the fire and watched as orange flames danced against the darkening sky. The sparks reminded her of city lights she once admired from her old apartment window, back in the life she'd walked away from. Here, with the ocean behind her and the night ahead, she couldn't deny she felt freer than she had in a long time. When Thomas arrived, it was almost as if the surrounding music and chatter paused for a moment. He wore casual beach pants and a light-colored shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. In one hand, he held his ever-present phone, but he tucked it away after a glance at the screen. Making his way through the revelers, he headed straight for her. "You made it," Nicole said, trying to keep her tone light, though her pulse leaped at the sight of him. He offered a slight grin, sitting beside her on the log. "I didn't want to miss this. Thought it would be a nice break from the chaos." The bonfire's glow flickered across his face, highlighting the tension in his eyes. Yet, as they chatted about everyday things, how long she'd stayed by the beach that morning, the silly jokes they overheard from other guests, a fragile ease began to surface. Nicole felt a flicker of hope that maybe he'd finally let his guard down. Before that could happen, his phone vibrated again. He checked the screen, muttered an apology, and stepped away, voice low as he paced along the shoreline. Nicole sighed, watching him vanish into the shadows. She tried to enjoy the soft music and the swirl of chatter, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. For all his kindness, his secrets felt like a gulf between them. Deciding to distract herself, she rose to grab a drink at a makeshift bar fashioned out of bamboo. On the way, she bumped into a couple of fellow guests who recognized her from the yoga session. They teased her into joining a silly group sing-along near the guitarist. She obliged, forcing a laugh that felt surprisingly genuine. Maybe she didn't have every answer, but for a few minutes, she let the bonfire's warmth and the guitar's lively chords carry her stress away. A while later, she stepped aside to check her phone. A soft breeze rustled the fabric of her dress as she scrolled. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a figure hovering near the pile of bags and towels guests had stacked at the edge of the circle. Something about the person's furtive movements set off alarm bells. She squinted, trying to see if they belonged to any of the group. But the figure, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, appeared to be digging through people's belongings. Alarm laced her veins. She tucked her phone away and made her way over, heart pounding. As she neared, the person grabbed what looked like a wallet and phone from someone's bag. Nicole glanced down at her own beach tote, resting precariously close to the intruder's rummaging hands. She called out, her voice sharper than expected. "Hey, What are you doing?" In a flash, the figure yanked Nicole's tote, ripping it off the chair. Shocked, Nicole lunged forward, but the thief dashed away, weaving through the scattered torches and startled guests. She let out a desperate shout, "Stop! He has my bag!" Everything happened in a blur. Startled by Nicole's cry, a few people tried to block the thief's path, but he slipped around them easily, heading down the dark, moonlit beach. Panic shot through Nicole at the thought of losing her phone, wallet, and camera, everything personal to her. She sprinted after him, unsteady on the uneven sand. Suddenly, a tall figure streaked past her. Thomas. He was fast, scanning the beach for any sign of the intruder's dark clothes and low-slung cap. Nicole trailed behind, her breath hitching in her throat as her sandals slapped against the wet sand. The thief bolted down the shoreline, nearly swallowed by shadows. "Circle around the dunes!" Thomas shouted to a pair of resort staff who had joined the chase. They scrambled to intercept. Adrenaline surged and Nicole kept running, heart hammering. She caught glimpses of Thomas bounding ahead, arms pumping, closing the gap between him and the thief. Closer, closer. With a burst of motion, Thomas lunged forward, tackling the thief into the sand. The impact sent a spray of wet grains into the air, and Nicole slowed to a halt, gasping for breath. One of the staff grabbed the thief's arms while Thomas pried Nicole's tote free, rummaging inside to check if everything was still there. The intruder cursed, trying to squirm loose, but the staff held tight until resort security arrived. Nicole watched, hands trembling, as Thomas stood. Sand clung to his shirt and hair, his chest heaving, yet relief radiated from him when his eyes found hers. He held up her bag. "It's all here," he managed, voice ragged. "You're all right?" She nodded, feeling the sting of tears she fought to keep at bay. This moment felt surreal. Her wallet and phone safe in the bag, Thomas panting from exertion, security guards leading the would-be thief away. She stumbled forward and grasped his arm to steady herself, the pounding of her heart slowly subsiding. "You really went after him," she breathed, awe and gratitude bleeding into her words. "Thank you." He brushed a thumb across the corner of her eye as though checking for tears. "Are you hurt?" Nicole shook her head, swallowing hard. "No, just shaken. I can't believe you did that. You could have been hurt." Thomas smiled, albeit wryly. "I wasn't about to watch him run off with your things." Night air swirled around them, carrying the tang of salt and the crackle of distant torches. Onlookers from the bonfire were drifting closer, commotion buzzing as staff assured everyone the situation was under control. Nicole stared at Thomas, her relief mingling with an overpowering sense that something deeper had passed between them. He hadn't hesitated for an instant to protect her. When they finally made their way back to the main circle, the adrenaline still thrummed in Nicole's veins. She clung to Thomas's arm, fearful that her knees might give out. Soft applause and murmurs of gratitude arose from some guests, praising the quick actions that prevented a more serious incident. Nicole found her thoughts spinning. If Thomas was truly just another guest, would he have so confidently taken command of the chase, rallying the staff with practiced ease? They separated momentarily when security asked for statements. Nicole recounted the events while staff guided the thief away. The entire time she felt a magnetic pull toward Thomas, as if she needed to see him again just to confirm they were both okay. Sure enough, once she was free, she spotted him near one of the flickering torches, brushing sand off his clothes. She approached, her heart twisting with a powerful mix of gratitude and confusion. "You saved me from a big mess," she said quietly. "Thank you. Again." He paused, glancing up. His expression held relief, but also something else. A fierce protectiveness, maybe even fear at what might have happened if he hadn't intervened. "I'm just glad you're safe." Nicole nodded, feeling her throat tighten. She realized in that moment that, no matter his secrets, she couldn't deny that Thomas cared for her. The starlight and flickering torches played across his features, and she noticed the shallow scratches on his arms from the scuffle. Without thinking, She brushed a bit of sand from his shoulder. "You're hurt," she murmured, noticing a bruise forming along his forearm. He dismissed it. "It's nothing." But Nicole sensed there was more to his courage than just being a chivalrous man on vacation. He'd risked himself without hesitation, practically orchestrating the entire chase. Her breath hitched. "Thomas, why?" He cut her off gently, resting a hand on her arm. "Because you matter," he said simply. "That's all." The night swelled around them, guests returning to the bonfire, staff moving on to calm the remaining excitement. In the fire's glow, Nicole observed the conflicting emotions in his eyes: relief, concern, a flicker of warmth that made her heart skip. Her earlier suspicions tangled with fresh gratitude, leaving her breathless. She recalled the typed note warning her to be careful, and now here was Thomas, throwing himself headlong into danger on her behalf. Who was he, truly? Nicole senses there's a crucial reason why Thomas is so protective. She can't ignore the feeling she's stepping into a larger plot, one that could alter the course of her life forever. Morning brought a buzz of anticipation that rippled through the resort. Flower arches lined the corridors, staff scurried about with colorful arrangements, and overhead speakers reminded guests of the gala's grand significance. Even the air felt charged, as if the impending celebration had electrified every palm frond and splash of ocean spray. Nicole wandered through the lobby, caught between curiosity about the glamorous preparations and the lingering unease that swirled after last night's attempted theft. She was still shaken by how quickly Thomas had acted, but the memory of him tackling the culprit left her with more questions than answers. He hadn't just helped, he had commanded the situation. She could still picture the staff following his instructions, as though he was the one in charge. With the gala looming, she suspected this event had everything to do with Thomas's mysterious influence, and she intended to find out the truth. Heading to the buffet area, Nicole tried to focus on something simple like breakfast. She filled a plate with scrambled eggs and fresh fruit, then glanced around for a quiet table. But the dining room was bustling with guests excited about tonight's festivities. Spotting an empty seat near the large windows, she slipped into it, hoping to gather her thoughts. A young couple on her left gushed over their schedule: spa appointments, a snorkeling tour, and finally the gala. On her right, two women debated which dress code was correct: tropical formal or black tie. Meanwhile, staff in crisp uniforms dashed between tables, delivering neatly folded invitations on polished silver trays. Nicole picked at her food, her appetite dulled by the swirl of uncertainty in her mind. A staff member stopped by her table, handing over a sealed note. "Your invitation, Ms. Nicole. We hope you'll attend tonight's anniversary gala. It's the highlight of the year." "Thank you," she managed, forcing a small smile. As she set the note aside, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Mind if I join you?" Thomas's tone carried a hint of caution, as though he wasn't certain she'd say yes. Nicole turned, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. "Go ahead." He slid into the chair opposite her. For a moment, they shared a strained silence, each searching for the right words. Nicole watched him carefully. The bruise on his arm from last night's scuffle was faintly visible, and there were smudges under his eyes. She wondered if he had been up all night handling the aftermath of the theft or something else. "Feeling better?" he asked. "After everything that happened?" She nodded. "A bit shaken, but I'm okay. Thank you for, well, everything you did. You didn't have to put yourself in danger like that." Thomas gave a light shrug, his gaze flicking toward the busy dining area. "I couldn't just stand by." He fell silent, as though he wanted to say more but was wrestling with how. Nicole let out a soft sigh. "Thomas, if this is too complicated, whatever's going on with you, maybe it's best I just focus on my vacation, or maybe even go home early." It pained her to say it, but confusion had worn her down. He stiffened, clearly troubled by the suggestion. "I get it," he murmured, "but please don't. At least not yet. I'll make things clear soon. Before Nicole could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, brow furrowing, and stood abruptly. I have to take this. I'm sorry. She watched him slip away, frustration mounting. She couldn't live in this limbo no matter how kind or protective he'd been. Something inside her whispered that she deserved the truth, especially after all they'd shared, however brief. Resolving to seek her own answers, Nicole finished breakfast and made her way through the increasingly festive corridors. Her feet carried her toward the administrative offices she'd glimpsed from afar, a part of the resort typically reserved for staff. Slipping down a quieter hallway, she passed door after door until she heard faint voices inside one of the rooms. She paused, heart thumping, and peeked through the narrow glass panel. There, a manager was adjusting a large sign that read, Lock Resorts. Underneath, smaller text listed properties around the globe. Nicole's stomach did a flip. Lock. That was Thomas's last name, wasn't it? Her mind flashed to the torn hints, the staff's respectful attitude, the mention of an heir, and Thomas's hands-on involvement. Could he be related to the founders of this entire resort chain? She realized she was standing in place, blood pounding through her ears. Gathering her courage, she tiptoed further along the corridor until she came across an unlocked door leading into what looked like a makeshift events office. Inside, a desk held scattered documents, some referencing the gala. She couldn't help inching closer, scanning the pages. One letter bore the heading Lock Resorts Corporate Headquarters and listed the signatory as Thomas Locke, CFO, Chief Financial Officer. Her breath caught. CFO? This entire time, Thomas wasn't just a privileged guest. He was part of the leadership of the resort chain, perhaps even the family heir. Nicole felt a rush of anger. He hadn't trusted her enough to reveal who he truly was, all while forging a connection with her that felt so genuine. The heartbreak of her divorce was still raw, and now it seemed she'd let her guard down for someone who might have been deceiving her all along. She jerked back from the desk at the sound of approaching voices. Quickly retreating to the corridor, she ducked behind a tall, decorative plant. 2 employees entered, discussing final preparations for the Locke family's arrival at the gala and the official passing of the torch to Thomas Locke, the new heir. Nicole's pulse thundered in her ears. Their words confirmed her suspicions beyond a doubt. As soon as the employees left, she slipped away, her mind a whirlwind of betrayal, confusion, and hurt. Why hadn't Thomas told her? Did he see her as just another tourist who might try to cozy up to him for money? The worst part was how real their connection had felt to her, like he genuinely cared. She thought of his protective instincts, the laughter they'd shared, the way he'd found her on the beach, but all of that was overshadowed by the half-truths he'd spun. In a daze, she drifted outside, following a path that wound through lush greenery to a secluded area near the pool lounge. There, amidst the gentle rush of a small waterfall, she sank onto a chair, trying to catch her breath. She felt betrayed, as though her kindness had been met with carefully constructed lies. That was when she felt a shadow fall across her. Thomas stood there, posture tense. "Nicole," he began, voice laced with concern. "I've been looking everywhere for you." She stared at him, uncertain whether to confront him with the truth she'd discovered. Fury warred with sadness inside her. Eventually she stood, crossing her arms over her chest. "Thomas Locke," she said, the name tasting strange on her tongue. "CFO of Locke Resorts. Are you still going to pretend you're just a casual guest?" He froze. For a moment, the only sounds were the trickle of water behind them and the faint melody of a steel drum somewhere in the distance. "You found out." "How could I not?" she snapped, tears threatening to blur her vision. "This place is your family's, isn't it? And all the while I've been left in the dark." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted you to see me for who I am, Not for the money or the status. My family has had problems with people exploiting us. I didn't want that to happen again." His eyes flickered with regret. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Nicole hugged herself, her heart twisting in painful knots. "So you thought lying was better? Making me feel ridiculous once I finally discovered the truth?" "Lying by omission, maybe," he admitted quietly. "I hoped I could be seen as just Thomas, not an heir. You have no idea how many people have approached me only because of the Locke name. I didn't want that with you." She scoffed. "And how was I supposed to react, stumbling onto all this on my own? Do you know what it's like to have your trust broken after everything I've been through?" He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "Nicole," he said, voice rough with emotion, "please, I never faked my feelings. Everything I did, protecting you, spending time with you, was real." She pressed her lips together, her anger and heartbreak colliding. Part of her believed him, but another part felt foolish for letting him get so close so easily. "I can't do this," she whispered, turning away. "I can't handle secrets. Not again." With that, she left him standing by the pool lounge, the waterfall's gentle hush a stark contrast to the storm raging in her heart. She wanted to flee, to gather her things and vanish before the gala turned the entire resort into one big Locke family celebration. Back in her suite, she started packing mechanically, shoving clothes into her suitcase with trembling hands. Tears slipped down her cheeks. 1,000 conflicting memories rushed through her. Thomas's patient smile, his unwavering care, and the documents scrawled with his signature. She was so lost in her tumult of emotion that she barely heard her phone buzz against the nightstand. Grabbing it, she blinked at the screen. A text message from Thomas. Just a few urgent words glowed from the device. "Please meet me tomorrow. I need to make things right." Nicole hardly slept, the bruised ache of betrayal lingering in her chest. Thomas's final text echoed in her mind. "Please meet me tomorrow. I need to make things right." She wanted to toss her phone aside and ignore him. Yet, in spite of her anger, a quiet part of her longed to hear his explanation, maybe to understand what made him hide so much. So when dawn broke over the horizon, casting soft coral light across the balcony of her suite, she found herself typing a terse reply. "Fine. Where?" He responded within minutes, asking her to come to the secluded garden beside the spa at noon. No other details, just a simple request. She wavered, torn between resentment and curiosity. But the knot of emotion in her stomach told her she had to go. If this was the last conversation they would ever have, at least she would leave knowing the truth. She spent the morning alone, pacing the tiled corridors that connected different wings of the resort. The usual sights, tropical blooms, cheerful guests, tastefully arranged lounge areas, felt overshadowed by the weight of what she'd discovered, that Thomas Locke was not merely a charming stranger, but an heir to the entire resort empire, here to finalize his succession. She passed by staff who politely nodded at her, many wearing discreet earpieces as they scurried about. The sense that everyone here was on high alert sank into her bones. A big arrival was imminent. Thomas's father, she suspected, and the entire resort buzzed with that knowledge. Shortly before noon, she made her way past the spa's reception area, following a narrow path that wound through tropical foliage. The garden loomed ahead, filled with lush greenery and the soothing trickle of a koi pond. She spotted a small stone bench by a cluster of ferns. There, Thomas waited, eyes on the ground, his posture tense. He rose as she approached, looking both relieved and regretful. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. Nicole stayed a few steps back, arms folded. "You wanted to explain, so explain." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "First, I'm sorry, not just for what I hid, but for how it all came out. I never wanted you to find out the way you did." She recalled the jolt of seeing his name on official documents, Thomas Locke, CFO, and hearing staff refer to the heir's arrival. The sting of betrayal still pressed at her heart. "Then why keep me in the dark?" she asked. "Why let me feel stupid for—" Her voice threatened to break, so she snapped her mouth shut. Thomas swallowed hard. "My family is powerful, and we've been burned before. People who seemed genuine turned out to be after the money or the name. It's made me wary, maybe too wary." He looked at her with pain in his eyes. "But with you, I wanted something real. I wanted to know if you'd care about me for who I am, not for the Locke fortune." She looked down at her sandals, the swirling patterns in the mosaic underfoot doing little to calm her nerves. "And what about me?" she said, voice trembling. "You think my trust issues disappeared just because we met in some paradise? I've been hurt too. And then you made a fool of me without meaning to, maybe. But it still hurts." Thomas started to move closer, but a sharp voice echoed across the garden. "So this is where you're hiding, Thomas?" A stern-faced man in a tailored suit strode into view, flanked by two others in similarly expensive attire. The older man's gaze flicked over Nicole with thinly veiled contempt before landing on Thomas. "Your father arrives tomorrow and you're wasting time out here?" Nicole stiffened, unsure if she should leave. Thomas's body went rigid. "I'm not hiding," he said evenly. "I needed to talk to someone." The man, clearly an advisor, shifted his attention to Nicole. "I see. Then I'll remind you we have more pressing matters. You're set to inherit this resort chain and we can't afford distractions." Nicole felt heat rise in her cheeks at the dismissive way he said, "distractions," but she held her ground. Thomas's expression hardened. "She isn't a distraction," he growled, "and I'm allowed a private conversation." The advisor sneered. "Is she aware of the contract terms your father insists on? That if you don't comply with the family's vision for the company, you risk losing everything?" Something in Nicole's chest constricted. She hadn't realized the stakes were that high. "Wait, Thomas, what is he talking about?" Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, shame flickering across his features. "My father has always been strict about the Locke legacy. He believes family members should marry within a certain social circle, maintain appearances, you name it. If I don't follow his guidelines, he's threatened to cut me off from the inheritance or tarnish my reputation in the board's eyes. It's complicated." The advisor cut in, "And you might consider that while you're making personal choices. We have a brand to protect." Nicole looked between them, heart pounding. She could see how the older man's words stung Thomas, almost as if they were chiseling away at him. Determined not to cower, she lifted her chin. "He's not a puppet," she said softly. "He can make his own decisions." The advisor gave a short, scornful laugh, turning to Thomas. "If your father sees you entangled with someone who has no place in this world, he'll make it hell for both of you. Do you want that?" A wave of anger welled up in Nicole. She tried to speak, but Thomas placed a hand on her arm, an unspoken plea for calm. He faced the advisor, voice low and resolute. "I'm done letting my life be dictated by business deals and hollow concerns about image. Nicole is important to me." A moment of tension thickened the air. Another advisor, standing quietly behind the first, cleared his throat. "Thomas, we have a schedule. The final documents are to be signed tonight, to prepare for your father's public announcement at tomorrow's gala. You know what's expected." Thomas's jaw tightened as he glanced at Nicole. She saw the conflict in his eyes, a longing to stand up for himself and for her, and the weight of loyalty to his family's empire. The men turned and strode away, leaving the garden heavy with unspoken threats. Nicole exhaled, shaky from the confrontation. "So, you see what I've been dealing with," Thomas murmured. "They want me to sign everything over, follow the family plan, keep up appearances, and if I don't, they'll shut me out." He paused, searching her face. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." She shook her head, heart aching at how trapped he seemed. You don't deserve to be strong-armed by your own family. But this is huge, Thomas. I don't know if I can—" Before she could finish, he gently took her hand. "I know," he said quietly. "I can't promise it will be easy, but I want to figure this out with you. No more secrets." Words failed her, overtaken by empathy and fear. She recognized in his eyes the same anxiety she felt, both wanting something real yet terrified of what might happen if they reached for it. Unsure what else to say, she squeezed his fingers and stepped away. "I need time to think." Thomas nodded, letting her hand slip free. "Take as much as you need." By nightfall, Nicole was back in her suite, mentally replaying every charged moment in the garden. Her entire body felt drained, as though each muscle had held tension for hours. She tried to calm down with a bath, steam curling around her like a warm hug, but her stomach churned with nerves she couldn't ease. She told herself it was stress, nothing more. Yet, as the evening wore on, her head throbbed, and faint nausea teased the back of her throat. She'd never been prone to seasickness or motion sickness, but she felt dizzy whenever she stood too quickly. She tried sipping water, lying down, anything to steady herself. In the final glow of lamplight, a realization began to form, a tiny spark in the corners of her mind that she'd been ignoring. She thought of recent days, the unexplained tiredness, the sudden waves of queasiness, the confusion about her emotions running high. A faint, trembling recognition spread through her. Rising from the bed, she stood in front of the tall mirror near the window. The reflection showed her pale face, her hair in disarray, and a kind of vulnerability in her own eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. Slowly, her hand moved to rest on her stomach. She inhaled, unsteady, the possibility looming like a thundercloud on the horizon. Alone in her suite, Nicole stands in front of the mirror, a hand resting on her stomach, breath catching as she contemplates the life-changing possibility that there might be more than one heartbeat inside her. Nicole awoke to a restless swirl of thoughts, her body still on edge from the uneasy sleep that had followed her discovery. As she opened her eyes, the first sensation was a wave of queasiness, followed by a fluttery feeling in the pit of her stomach. Still wearing the previous night's robe, she walked into the bathroom and splashed water on her face. Her reflection seemed more fragile than she remembered. Pale cheeks, lingering worry in her eyes, and a new awareness tugging at the corners of her mind. She stood there for a long moment, recalling the flutter of fear and hope she'd felt while placing a hand on her abdomen the night before. In her past, with her ex-husband and all the heartbreak that followed, she'd never pictured herself alone and facing anything like this. Yet the signs were piling up. The fatigue, the dizzy spells, that deepening sense that her body was changing. Instead of dwelling on her doubts, she made herself dress for the day in a loose-fitting sundress, the most comfortable thing she could find. She needed answers. Without a second guess, she secured an appointment at a discreet local clinic just off the resort property. It was only a short cab ride away, and within half an hour, she found herself in a quiet waiting room with low lighting and the faint hum of an air conditioner. She tried to keep calm, though her heart drummed in her chest as a nurse guided her into a clean, pale green examination room. The doctor arrived, a gentle-faced woman with a soothing voice. Nicole explained her symptoms, feeling vulnerable but also strangely determined. Blood tests were taken, and an ultrasound was arranged almost immediately. Lying on the examination table, she stared at the ceiling, tears pricking her eyes as the cold gel touched her skin. It took only a moment of scanning for the doctor's eyebrows to lift in mild surprise. She angled the screen toward Nicole. "There," the doctor said softly, pointing to 3 distinct shapes on the monitor. "You're pregnant. With triplets." The word rang in Nicole's ears, overwhelming her with shock. Triplets. A wave of disbelief raced through her, quickly followed by awe, fear, and something like elation all tangled into one. She blinked away stinging tears, staring at the tiny shapes that flickered on the screen. The doctor offered her a gentle smile, though her tone was practical. Triplet pregnancies can be higher risk. You'll need careful monitoring, rest, and support. For a moment, Nicole could hardly speak. She clutched the edge of the exam table. Triplets, she repeated under her breath, trying to let it sink in. She'd prepared herself for the possibility of a single pregnancy, but 3 babies? The idea felt monumental, as though her entire world had just tilted on its axis. Once the doctor completed her notes and gave Nicole some initial guidelines, she handed over a sealed envelope containing the first ultrasound images. Nicole slipped it into her purse, feeling both dazed and protective of the fragile future it represented. In that envelope lay the truth about everything that would change her life. Leaving the clinic, she ambled down a short path to a beach overlook. The wind ruffled her hair as she stood there, gazing at the bright surf. Any other day she might have marveled at the beauty of the scene, but now her mind was consumed by questions. How was she going to handle this? Should she go straight to Thomas and tell him? And what about his family, who were already so controlling? She returned to the resort, swirling in conflicted thoughts. Just as she stepped through the front lobby, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "We need to talk. It's in your best interest. Meet me in the South Lounge." Her stomach twisted in a new knot. The South Lounge was a semi-private area with plush sofas mostly used for VIP guests or high-profile business dealings. Despite her reluctance, curiosity, and a faint sense of dread compelled her to go. She found the lounge nearly empty except for a severe-looking man in a tailored suit sitting with a cup of coffee, ankles crossed. He gestured for her to join him. When she hesitated, he spoke in a low tone. "Ms. Nicole, I presume?" He waited for her nod, then introduced himself as one of the Locke family's associates. "I work closely with Thomas's father. I understand you've been spending time with Thomas." Her pulse quickened. "Yes, I have. Is there something you want to tell me?" He set aside his coffee, regarding her with cool disinterest. "It's come to our attention you might be pregnant. I won't ask how we came by that information, but let's just say the Locke family has many eyes. If it's true, then we have a straightforward proposition for you." Her breath caught in her throat. Fear and anger flared. "Go on," she managed. He slid a slim folder across the table, opening it with a single precise motion. Inside was a packet of documents, along with an unsettling number of zeros. "We're prepared to offer this sum to ensure you disappear, so to speak. Move somewhere else, live quietly, and never claim any connection to Thomas or the Locke name." A chill rippled through Nicole. She'd heard stories of powerful families protecting themselves at all costs, but experiencing it firsthand felt like a slap. She glanced at the figure on the page, then closed the folder. "You think you can pay me to walk away from him? From a possible child? Children?" He shrugged with a practiced veneer of polite arrogance. "We prefer not to create scandal. You're not the first to show up with a story like this, though I believe you're the first to have it happen here at the resort, just as an important transition is underway. The Locke family is generous, but they must protect their interests." Disbelief and rage flooded Nicole's senses. Her hands shook, and she resisted the urge to hurl the folder across the lounge. "Listen carefully," she said, voice low and steady. "I'm not asking for your money. This was never about money." The man considered her, his expression bored. "It's never about the money at first, Ms. Nicole, but let's spare ourselves illusions. You'll find it's easier to move on once you accept reality. Thomas's father will never allow this relationship to continue under normal circumstances, especially not if you're carrying multiple heirs." Nicole's entire body went rigid. She realized he must know the details already, that she wasn't just pregnant, but pregnant with triplets. Appalled that her personal information had traveled so fast, she clenched her jaw. "I don't want anything from you or your family. I won't be bought off." The man merely tapped the folder. It's open-ended. If you change your mind, you know where to reach me." With that, he stood, offered a polite nod, and breezed out of the lounge, leaving behind a choking silence and the faint echo of betrayal. Heart hammering, Nicole fled the lounge, ignoring the sideways glances from a few guests who noticed her distress. She found a deserted corridor near the outdoor courtyards, pressing her back against the cool wall. The breezes carried the scent of tropical flowers, but she was too rattled to enjoy it. Tears brimmed in her eyes, a mix of fury, panic, and heartbreak. She pressed her hand to her abdomen again, thinking of the 3 tiny lives that had unexpectedly taken root inside her. She wanted to tell Thomas, to demand he stand by her, but she also feared being seen as exactly what his father's associates thought, a gold digger looking to trap an heir. Anger flared again. The very suggestion made her blood boil. She'd never sought anything but honesty and genuine connection. Time slipped by while she stood there in a tempest of emotions. Finally, she forced herself to straighten. She could run, yes. She could leave the resort, vanish back into her old life and raise the babies in quiet anonymity. Or she could fight for the chance to stand by Thomas's side, if he wanted her there. She owed it to herself and to those unborn children to at least try. One step at a time, she made her way to her suite. The path felt longer than usual, the corridors a blur. Once inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, breathing in shallow bursts. Her phone lay on the nightstand, silent except for the blinking message light. She resisted checking it, knowing it was likely more inquiries or demands from the Locke entourage. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed and took out the ultrasound envelope. With trembling fingers, she looked at the black and white snapshots, 3 tiny sacs, 3 distinct flickers of life. A torrent of emotions rose, awe, fear, a fierce protectiveness. She let the tears flow, hugging the images to her chest. Her entire life was changing at lightning speed. How could she possibly face Thomas's powerful father or an entire corporation's disapproval when she felt so vulnerable? Yet as the afternoon sun shifted across the walls, painting the suite in soft gold, Nicole's resolve solidified. She wouldn't let fear dictate her next move. Perhaps Thomas was facing his own battles, but he needed to know about the triplets. Whatever came next, they had to decide together, even if it meant confronting the father who wanted her gone. Resolute, she freshened up, wiping away the tear streaks on her cheeks. Her hair was a mess, her eyes puffy, but she no longer cared about appearances. Clutching her purse, she double-checked that the envelope of ultrasound prints was safely inside. The knowledge that she carried not 1, but 3 children sparked a sense of new bravery she didn't know she possessed. Clutching the sonogram envelope in her trembling hand, Nicole steps into the corridor, determined to find Thomas and face whatever fate awaits them both. Nicole's heart pounded as she navigated the winding corridors in search of Thomas. Still clutching the sonogram envelope, she ignored the glances of passing guests and staff. The faint scent of tropical flowers filled the air, mingling with the hush of whispered conversations. But all she could focus on was finding him before her courage wavered. She turned a corner and nearly collided with a bellhop wheeling a cart of fresh linens. Apologizing under her breath, she pressed on, eventually emerging into the open-air courtyard. Afternoon light streamed in, glinting off the resort's grand fountain. Beyond it stood Thomas, speaking in hushed tones to 2 formally dressed men who exuded the same severe demeanor as the associate who had tried bribing her. Gathering her nerve, Nicole approached. The men spotted her first, eyes narrowing as though irritated by the interruption. Thomas glanced over his shoulder, surprise flickering across his face. He murmured a brusque dismissal to them, and they stepped back with obvious reluctance. "Nicole," he said, voice laced with concern. "Are you all right?" She inhaled, steadying the swirl of emotion inside her. "I need to talk to you. Alone." Her tone was unyielding, and Thomas seemed to sense it. He sent the men a quick, authoritative nod, and they disappeared inside the building. When they were gone, he turned back to her, searching her face. She led him to a quieter corner of the courtyard. The air felt heavy with unsaid words, the tinkling fountain the only gentle background sound. Nicole clenched the sonogram envelope in her hand, breath catching in her throat. "Whatever it is," Thomas said softly, "I'll do what I can to help." Nicole's throat felt tight. After all his secrecy and the demands of his family, was it fair to burden him with this news? But she had no choice. She had to be honest. She extended the envelope. "Open it," she whispered. With an uncertain frown, Thomas took the envelope and peeled it open. He slid out the ultrasound images, brow furrowing as he studied them. Time stretched taut as his eyes flicked between the pictures and Nicole's face. "Are these—" He looked up, voice trailing off in astonishment. "I'm pregnant," Nicole confirmed, her tone unsteady. "And it's not just one baby. There are 3. Thomas froze, the world around them seeming to go silent. Then, the images trembling in his grasp, he exhaled in a stunned rush of breath. "Triplets?" he repeated, as if unable to believe his own words. Nicole nodded, tears threatening to well in her eyes despite the determination she'd been holding on to. "I found out at a clinic near here. This is real." He set the images gently against his chest, then pulled her into a sudden, careful embrace, like he was afraid he'd break her. She felt the hammer of his heart against her cheek, a mixture of joy and panic in the tightness of his arms. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice husky, "for everything, for not telling you the whole truth before, for letting you go through any of this alone. I never wanted you to be hurt, but this changes everything." Relief sparked through her, mingling with apprehension. "I was afraid you'd be angry, or think I was after your inheritance." The memory of his father's associate loomed in her mind, stirring fresh anger. Thomas pulled back enough to see her eyes. "You're not like that. I know you. I might have been stupidly cautious at first, but I know your heart now." He glanced down at the ultrasound pictures, his gaze turning awestruck. "Triplets," he repeated softly. Nicole swallowed hard, pushing past the knot in her throat. "Your father's people already approached me. They offered me money to disappear." The bitterness in her voice was plain, and she felt Thomas's grip tighten on her shoulders. "They did what?" A cold edge hardened his tone. "They had no right—" The sound of loud footsteps interrupted him. Nicole glanced over Thomas's shoulder and saw a tall, imposing figure approaching, a man older than Thomas, with the same angular jaw and watchful eyes. It had to be his father. Several advisors hovered behind him like a protective squad. Thomas's father stopped a few paces away, gaze flicking between Nicole and Thomas. "I heard the rumors," he said, voice frosty. "So they're true. You're expecting children, Nicole?" Nicole's heart hammered. She felt Thomas press close beside her, as if shielding her from the man's imposing presence. She nodded, drawing courage from the warmth of Thomas's hand at her back. "Yes, I am." Thomas's father exhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring. "This is highly inconvenient. You realize the scandal this could cause right before we finalize the succession? We have stakeholders to consider, an entire brand—" Thomas cut him off, voice trembling with anger. "She's carrying my children, your grandchildren. You can't reduce them to a scandal." A tense silence blanketed the courtyard. A couple of guests in the distance paused, sensing the confrontation. Thomas's father's mouth flattened into a grim line. "And what do you propose we do? Have a rushed marriage to cover your indiscretion? How do we even know if these—" Nicole's cheeks burned at his insinuation. She clenched her fists, but before she could retort, Thomas exploded. "Don't you dare question my responsibility here. I'll claim them, and Nicole, no matter what the board says." Anger darkened his father's gaze. "You realize this could cost you your position in the family empire. You may have to walk away from everything." Thomas faltered for half a breath, the enormity of the threat sinking in. but then he set his jaw, sliding an arm around Nicole's waist. "I'm prepared to, if that's what it takes." Chaos erupted as the advisors behind his father protested in a flurry of voices. Talk of business strategy, legal ramifications, pre-existing contracts. Nicole's head spun, but she held on to Thomas's steadiness. She'd braced herself for this confrontation, yet it was more tumultuous than she imagined. One advisor stepped forward, ignoring Nicole as though she were invisible. "Thomas, be rational. You can't throw away your inheritance over an unplanned pregnancy." Nicole's restraint snapped. "I'm standing right here," she stated clearly, eyes narrowed. "And these babies are a blessing, not some crisis for your precious image." Her voice shook with anger she no longer tried to contain. "I don't want your money or your empire. I just want to be with someone who values me and values our children." Thomas's father let out a harsh laugh. "Isn't that what they all say? I've seen women use pregnancies for leverage before." Nicole glared at him, the memory of that bribe folder searing in her mind. "You tried to buy me off to leave. Did that look like leveraging pregnancy to you? Because I sure didn't accept a dime?" Her words echoed in the courtyard, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Thomas's father leveled a cold stare at his son. "You must handle this however you see fit, but don't expect Lock Resorts to welcome the scandal." He paused, mouth twisted in disapproval. "Make your choice. The final papers aren't signed yet. Once your status is made official tomorrow, there'll be no turning back." With that, he turned on his heel, gesturing for his advisors to follow. Furious energy crackled in his wake, leaving Nicole and Thomas alone again amid the swirling tension of what had just transpired. Nicole took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what for. Apologizing for upending his carefully laid future, perhaps. Thomas caught her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Don't be. None of this is your fault." He exhaled, closing his eyes for a second. "I love you and I already love these babies, even if that costs me everything else." Tears pricked her eyes at the raw conviction in his voice. She rested her hand on her belly beneath his warm palm. "You're certain?" she asked, voice tight with emotion. He nodded, leaning his forehead against hers. "I have to protect what matters most. If my father or the board can't accept that, then maybe I never belonged in that world to begin with." The distant hum of resort life carried on, a nearby fountain, the shuffle of a passing cart. But here, in this charged moment, Nicole felt only Thomas. They'd arrived at a place of truth, a place where love and loyalty trumped the demands of an empire. Then, as if on cue, the click of footsteps erupted behind them. Security staff who had been trailing Thomas's father scurried to catch up with him, tensions still simmering in the air. Thomas sighed, drawing Nicole nearer. She could see the battle lines being drawn in his eyes, a family legacy on one side and an unbreakable commitment to her and the triplets on the other. Thomas sets a trembling hand on Nicole's stomach, determined. His father storms off, leaving the future of the resort and their family in sudden jeopardy. The next day arrived with an undercurrent of tension rippling throughout the resort. Early morning sunlight illuminated the white columns and palm fronds, but a heaviness lingered in the air as word spread that Thomas's father had threatened drastic action. Quiet murmurs among the staff hinted that the elder Locke was prepared to do anything, nullify Thomas's inheritance, smear Nicole's reputation, to protect the family's proper image. Thomas paced the length of Nicole's suite while she sat on the sofa, hands folded protectively over her stomach. They were supposed to meet his father and the board of executives in an hour, a final showdown over his role in Lock Resorts. Outside, the ocean glittered, indifferent to their turmoil. "Are you sure about this?" Nicole asked softly, studying his anxious face. "We can still leave. You don't have to go through this." He paused mid-step, turning to her. "I can't run away. This is my family, my legacy, but more importantly, I won't hide you or the babies." The fierceness in his voice both comforted and worried her. The meeting was set in a private conference room overlooking the water, elegantly designed with floor-to-ceiling windows and polished wooden tables. When Thomas and Nicole arrived, senior staff members sat in a neat row while his father stood at the head of the table, flanked by advisors. They turned in unison, the rustle of expensive suits underscoring the tension. Thomas's father wasted no time. "You're late," he snapped, though they were right on the hour. His gaze flicked toward Nicole, disapproval clear in the curl of his lip. "I trust you understand what's at stake." Thomas squared his shoulders, moving to stand beside Nicole. "I do, but I won't compromise on my family's well-being." An advisor stepped in, adjusting his glasses. "Thomas, Lock Resorts is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with thousands of employees and worldwide properties. This is bigger than you, and certainly bigger than a personal affair." Nicole felt a stab of anger at being referred to in such a dismissive way. She opened her mouth to retort, but Thomas spoke first. "I love Nicole," he said firmly. "She's pregnant with triplets, my children. If the board or my father refuse to accept that, then I'm prepared to relinquish my position." A hush fell over the room. A couple of staff members, ones Nicole recognized from earlier supportive interactions, exchanged worried glances but gave her a subtle nod, as if to say they believed in her. His father shook his head, a dark scowl creasing his brow. "You'd throw away everything for a woman you barely know? For children that weren't planned?" Something about that question sent a flare of protectiveness through Nicole. She stepped forward, meeting his father's glare head-on. "The fact that we didn't plan this doesn't make them any less real or important. We aren't asking for your approval so we can profit from the Locke name. We want to live honestly. Thomas has been part of your empire his entire life, but that doesn't give you the right to control his heart." A flicker of uncertainty passed over his father's face. He glanced around the table at the wide-eyed advisors and staff. "This is about more than hearts and romance. We have shareholders to consider. If rumors spread that the heir has fathered triplets out of wedlock with a woman he just met..." An older staff member at the far end of the table cleared her throat. She was someone Nicole had once seen attending to large VIP gatherings with effortless grace. "Sir," the woman said gently, "the resort prides itself on warmth and hospitality. Hiding a pregnancy, or forcing Ms. Nicole to leave, would do far more harm than transparency ever could." Thomas's father turned sharply. "And you think you understand what's best for our reputation?" "Yes," the woman replied, her chin lifting. "Families come here to celebrate love and unity. Embracing Thomas's new family could be the best message we can send. Guests admire honesty, not deception." A murmur of agreement rippled through a handful of staff. Nicole watched the father's face tighten, like a fortress resisting siege, yet she sensed a crack in his certainty. Another advisor chimed in, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "The truth is, sir, if this situation goes public, trying to buy Ms. Nicole off or denying your grandchildren could lead to even worse publicity." Thomas reached for Nicole's hand under the table, gripping it tightly. For the first time, she felt a current of hope that they weren't completely alone in this battle. His father surveyed the room, perhaps realizing how quickly he was losing support for his hardline stance. At last, his gaze swung back to Thomas and Nicole. "What is your plan, then? If you remain part of Locke Resorts, you must assume official responsibilities now." Thomas took a breath, voice measured. "I'll assume the role as planned, but I won't be a puppet. Let me oversee one segment of the resorts, maybe just this one for starters, so I can balance my duties with caring for Nicole and the babies." A faint crease deepened on his father's brow. "And if the board won't have it?" Thomas set his jaw. "Then I resign. I'll choose my family over money and power any day." Silence again. The tension in the air felt almost audible, like a string drawn tight. Finally, his father let out a long sigh, as though deflating. He glanced at the older staff member who had spoken in Nicole's defense, then at the rest of the group. I won't force a scandal by driving away my own son, but you'd better prove this is worth the risk." A wave of relief poured through Nicole, even if his words carried an undercurrent of grudging acceptance rather than outright blessing. For Thomas, though, it was enough. He nodded solemnly, stepping over to shake his father's hand. The contact felt stiff, guarded, but it was a truce of sorts. As the meeting concluded, a careful sense of calm settled over the room. Advisors began gathering their notes, staff members exhaled in quiet relief, and the father slowly departed, flanked by only a couple of remaining loyalists. Nicole and Thomas remained behind, absorbing the aftermath. One by one, a few supportive employees approached, offering gentle congratulations. Some inquired if there would be a small reception now that they knew about the pregnancy. Nicole laughed awkwardly, mind spinning at how drastically life had changed. But the warmth from these well-wishers soothed her heart, reminding her that for every detractor, there were others who valued real love. Later that evening, the entire atmosphere of the resort seemed transformed. Guests bustled around in vibrant outfits, taking pictures by lavish floral arches. Live music drifted from the open-air stage, celebrating the official anniversary gala. Though the day had been fraught with confrontation, Thomas still held on to the plan of attending briefly, not wanting to hide away like a secret. Nicole stood by him near the entrance, wearing a flowing dress that concealed the faint beginnings of her baby bump. She felt both out of place and oddly triumphant. This was a brand new chapter in her life. Thomas placed a gentle hand at the small of her back as they greeted a circle of guests. His father made a brief appearance, nodding curtly at them before slipping away to meet business associates. Nicole caught a momentary flash of regret on his face, as though he realized how precarious his relationship with his son had become. She guessed it might take time, maybe a very long time, before he truly welcomed her into the family. But at least there was no immediate threat of forcing her out or denying the triplets. As the evening wore on, a musician took the stage, playing a melody that drifted across the pool and gardens. Thomas and Nicole found a quiet table near the perimeter of the party, sneaking small bites of catered delicacies. He leaned in, voice low. "I know it won't all be perfect, but I promise I'll protect you and our children, no matter what my father does or doesn't do." She squeezed his hand. "I believe you." In the days that followed, a cautious calm settled over the resort. Rumors ebbed and flowed, but the official story was that Thomas would be taking leadership of certain operations while balancing family life. Several staff members went out of their way to show Nicole support, dropping by with fresh fruit or a simple smile of encouragement. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Nicole and Thomas walked along the water's edge, the gentle surf soaking their ankles. The sky glowed in deep oranges and purples, framing them in a breathtaking panorama. Nicole felt the soft, uneven flutter of her growing belly, a reminder that each day brought her closer to motherhood. Thomas slipped an arm around her, resting his other hand over her midsection. They hadn't fully mapped out baby names or future plans, but they had each other's unwavering commitment, and that was enough to start with. Glancing up at him, Nicole caught his tender smile, and for a moment, all the stress of corporate empires, looming family drama, and uncertain headlines faded into the background. Right then, she saw only hope and genuine happiness mirrored in his eyes. Nicole and Thomas stand hand in hand at the water's edge as the sun dips below the horizon. Their future is still uncertain, but one thing is clear: they're forging a life of love and hope, ready to welcome 3 new little hearts into the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.